Well, hello there, everybody. It's RowingChat time again. I'm Rebecca Caro, and I'm hosting RowingChat. I'd like first to remind you that we have a new website, which is www.rowing.chat. And on there, you will see all of the different podcasts in the RowingChat network. So although I started this podcast back in 2013, since that time, we've added several new shows and we have more coming in the pipeline. We're particularly interested in contacting people who might like to start a show in their country or in their city, and people who are keen to talk about rowing, different aspects of it. So do get in touch if you'd like to via the website, which is rowing.chat. You can also subscribe to get a weekly newsletter, which is a link to each of the episodes that we have published in that week. So you will get RowingChat, this podcast. You'll also get Ready Row USA and the Strength Coach Roundtable, which is a strength and conditioning podcast led by Will Ruth, Blake Gourlay, and Joe DeLeo, which has been running for quite a few years now. And the most recent addition to the field is Sean Wolfe, who runs the Rowing Illustrated boards, which are discussion forums, rowingillustrated.com. And he does micro interviews, which are very short and sharp, mostly with American-based athletes and coaches. And his is the Rowing Wolf podcast. And then, of course, there is Faster Masters Rowing Radio with Marlene Royal, the Masters coach. And she specializes each month in doing a podcast about the training which you could be doing during that month. This is orientated toward the Northern Hemisphere, and we do hope to accommodate our Southern Hemisphere listeners a little bit later in the year. Now, today, I'd like to welcome Benjamin Cox to RowingChat. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Now, Ben, please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background in rowing.
Well, I'm the director of RowUK, which is an organisation I set up about 2.5 years ago. We're based in Leeds, but a long time before, the last 10 years really before that, I worked at London Youth Rowing, where I was at first a coach and then programme director. And before that, I taught at King's School in Rochester, and before that, I learned to row, in fact, at Leeds University. So I played cricket all my life as a kid, and normal thing, I think, for most people. I went to university and thought, well, I'll give rowing a try because, I don't want to get fat over winter, basically. Was fortunate enough to, that was straight after Redgrave's 5th gold. So everybody else decided to do the same thing. So we're just fortunate enough, really, to have a good bunch of guys who have done well at other sports, and we had a good couple of years. So upon graduation, although I was a moderate level rower, I was okay. We trained really hard. I was able to get the guys organised. But upon graduation, I realised I wanted to stay in rowing, focus on coaching. And at that time, the only place you could really get a job, as a rowing coach, apart from a few universities, was in public schools in the UK, certainly. Got the role at King, and under the sort of tutelage of Dr. Richard Suthers, who's one of his sons rowed for GB, really learned a lot. But the really interesting thing was I was exposed to the way that sport was structured in independent schools in the UK, because I never set foot inside an independent school up until then. And it was a real eye-opener just how important sport was in terms of its holistic development of the whole, in terms of education, the development of the whole child. And it was really very different to what I experienced in state schools. And I just thought this was a great idea. And I thought, and then, I was looking at the back of Regatta magazine, and London Youth Rowing were looking for coaches. And I thought, well, this is such a great model. Let's see if we can take this level of support, take these expectations, and then take them into, East London, which is an area of, significant socioeconomic disadvantage, and see if we can achieve similar results. So I did that. I was there for 10 years, started Mossbourne Community Rowing Academy, which is, getting there. It's doing okay, and a number of other programs. And we had a lot of kids from those sort of backgrounds that went on to Russell Group University, someone on to Oxford and Cambridge, someone on to American scholarships. And the model really started to work. And I was really fascinated by having the sort of expectations for the young people from disadvantaged backgrounds that were just completely innate and normal and to be expected in the independent sector. And then, so I was there for a good, I'd say 10 years. And then I saw on the alumni grapevine that they built a new £1.2 million boathouse in Leeds, because when I was there, we had to travel over to York. I thought, that's interesting. And I was on a driving holiday, and I ran by the boathouse about 6 months after it was built in 2014. And it was shut up shop, whereas all our clubs and centres that we ran in London, hundreds of kids on the water each day. So I wrote to the university, just wrote to the Pro-Vice Chancellor and said, look, I've got an idea. I think we should try the similar model to that we had in London, put full-time coaches in state schools near to the university, develop young people as both rowers and academics, raise the aspirations. And that way, if we can develop those young people in a consistent way through the university boathouse over 5 to 7 years, and then bring them into the university, well developed as athletes in a consistent way, then we could do something really quite interesting with the University Boat Club. And what is more, the university is starting to appeal to young people from, who wouldn't normally consider higher education an option for them. They liked the idea. Long story short, I moved up to Leeds, started RowUK, and we're about 2 years in and enjoying it so far, and just starting to build the beginning of programs.
Benjamin, that's an incredible journey. I'd like to roll back to reflect on a couple of the things that you've mentioned. So firstly, what are the expectations that in the public school, which to our American listeners, that's fee-paying schools as opposed to non-fee-paying schools. So in the public school system, what are these expectations around sport?
That just as you would do in maths, and this isn't across all independent schools by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a general theme is that insofar as you would walk into maths or English, you would be expected to sit down, open your books, concentrate, do the very best you can, go home, work as hard as you can, and achieve the best possible grade you can. And they are as consistent with that approach in sport and extracurricular activity as they are with the approach to academia. It doesn't happen as much in state schools. Now, there are some state schools where, there really does happen. There's a huge amount of support, but it's not with quite the same level of, fervour and focus as you get in independent schools. I think it's partly historical, partly cultural. A lot of it is resource, obviously. But it seems to be something that, I noticed, coming from a state school background, I noticed, really, it was a real eye-opener, really sort of hit me between the eyes. That there was a real, we would, at the end of each term, we would sit down and we would go, as teachers, go through every single child and what they were doing outside the classroom. And each child, we had the time and the resource and, small class sizes to be able to really look at each child as an individual case of what can we do to support them and develop them. And I think, there's just that level of expectation that you will always do your best and you will stretch yourself, and the bar is raised and then you reach the bar and the bar is raised again and you reach that bar. And it was just this comfort with success, but also this comfort with disappointment and failure. That failure wasn't something, failure was demystified. It wasn't seen as something to shy away from. It was seen as something to embrace. This idea of seeking out challenge and actually, embracing challenge. And those things, they happen in the state sector, but in the independent sector, you could see it approached in a very systematic way. And as I say, it was a new experience for me. And I just thought that little bit more emphasis on sport, and in this case, rowing, being something where, that notion of delayed gratification, that you would say in 2 or 3 years' time, I want to achieve this result. Here's the process I need to put in place to achieve that result. And I'm consistent and persistent in my approach to achieve that goal. Extracurricular education, often in the state sector, is a nice to have. It's an add-on. Costs don't really allow them to focus on it as much. But the independent sector was absolutely intrinsic to the offer. And as part of the school saw it as part of their USP. And they, being businesses, that they had to make sure that their offer in the extracurricular sphere gave them a competitive advantage in different respects.
That's fascinating. And so that insight has led you toward developing something you called the model. And for RowUK, what is the model?
Okay, so slightly different to London Youth Rowing. So if I can go back to London Youth Rowing, it was very much focused on the junior pathway. So here we start secondary school at 11 years old in year 7, and we finish at 18 years old in year 13. And at London Youth Rowing, we were very much focused on that age group. And then we could see that a lot of young people would go off to those outstanding institutions, and they would often cite the fact that their experience in rowing is really what drove them to aspire to university, full stop. And then in some respects, universities of a stature and a status and higher than they ever imagined. So although we knew anecdotally that a lot of young people going on to higher education, there was no way of measuring that systematically. The opportunity with RowUK working in Leeds is that the model would be not just the junior club and local schools, but it would involve the university as well. So we're very fortunate that we've got Leeds Boathouse, and within that we've got the university club and both the one rowing club in the city, Leeds Rowing Club, operating out of it. And then you've got the schools programs which I created, which feed into that same boathouse. So you've almost got this little rowing community where young people. We have a system here called free school meals, where effectively, if you have a household income of less than £16,000 a year, you qualify for free school meals. And that's a really good way of measuring how much support a young person needs and what sort of socioeconomic needs they have. In the schools we work with, 60-70% of the kids have come from that sort of background. So it's a tiny, tiny household income. So it's real serious poverty. Whereas I think the national average, I'm guessing, but I think it's around about probably 10-15% maybe. Don't quote me on that, but it's in areas in London where we consider there to be quite a lot of deprivation, you're talking 30-40%. In the schools we work in Leeds, it's 60-70. So those young people would be coached by Leeds University student volunteers, would volunteer in their schools. So automatically, you don't just have the coaching, you have the mentoring, you have that that notion of normalizing the notion of higher education over a period of time by interaction between middle class university students and working class school students. And then when they come down to the boathouse and progress to the water, there's the same familiar faces, and it's people operating around the boat club with expectations that they would absolutely go to higher education, would absolutely go onto a professional job, and would expect to have their own house and cars and all those sorts of things, which is really quite foreign to the young people we aim to work with. So we're very fortunate that everything's under one roof, and we have, as I say, we have volunteers from Leeds Rowing Club and from the university going into the schools and acting as mentors and coaches. So it's all very, very joined up, and it interpenetrates, and that pathway from local schools into the boathouse and onto either the university if they want to go higher education, or if they want to go to further education, which in this country means things like apprenticeships, NVQs, technical qualifications, or indeed if they want to go off to another university somewhere in the country, absolutely fine. But really, it costs money to go away to university in this country, so a lot of the kids need to stay at home and stay in the city. So as the program matures, we expect them, if they do want to go to higher education, to stay in the city. So the model is about all those constituent parts interpenetrating in terms of a pathway for the athlete, but also a lot of those members, when they're 18 plus, 23 plus, giving back into the program to bring through young people in the future.
So in the schools, you start them with rowing machines, I'm guessing, and presumably the school has to buy these?
Where possible. So there's two strands. One is very similar to the program that we ran on a big scale in London Youth Rowing, which is, as you say, indoor rowing machines. 4 to 5 rowing machines. We fundraise to try and support the loaning of those rowing machines into those schools where we can. Where the schools can, we try and get them to buy some rowing machines. Not often we say, you buy one rowing machine, we'll loan you a rowing machine, just to get them started. And then they get a free volunteer coach who's level 2 trained, all the background checks, that sort of thing, first aid trained. And they go in once a week, run that indoor rowing club. And those numbers have grown to sort of 20, 30, 35 kids coming once a week. And then we run an indoor rowing competition 3 times a year. And that acts as a competition framework to drive participation in those clubs. And then the kids that do either well in the indoor rowing champs or have a high level of participation in the clubs, they can then go to Leeds Rowing Club to get onto the Learn to Row course and progress onto the water if they so wish. That's one strand.
So that's interesting that the high level of participation is part of the criteria. So you don't need to be a genius athlete. It's about the dedication and commitment.
We want to reward two things. So the obvious one, which very quickly, does this person have the physical attributes to do well at the sport? So that's obviously a very obvious and normal channel. And those kids who have got ability, let's get those those kids onto a Learn to Row course and support them as much as possible. But you know, I was tall for my age at 11, and I was really short for my age at 13. So and I was really short for my age at 15, and then at 16 I was tall again. So I know what it's like to, you know, we really want to do well, but with the best of the world, for your physicality to let you down. And it sort of let me down for 2 or 3 years, but I had to really fight to maintain parity. You know? So I know what it feels like to want to do well, but not being able to do as well as you'd like. So I absolutely thought, for me, it was crucial that we reward, as I said before, consistency and persistency. So we have something called the Metre Meter, where kids will get on the rowing machine. I know, it came to me once in a flash. So the kids get on the rowing machine, they rack up some meters, you know, not too many, because we want to make sure the technique's there and that sort of thing as well. But, you know, if they want to tell their teacher or bug their teacher, get down there at lunchtime, get a few more meters. We put big charts up on the wall. They get as many meters as they can. And then we give it at certain milestones, 10,000 meters, 25, 50, up to 1 million. We have certificates for them which get handed out in assembly. So those kids just doing the right thing, turning up, being consistent. They may be, you know, not the biggest athlete in the world, but we want to reward them, because sure enough, you know what it's like. You've got these people who are like me, who were getting smashed outside at 14, 15, but fighting really hard. And then you get to 16, 17, and the kids who sprouted early, for whom everything came easy, as soon as they start getting beat again, they bug out first opportunity, because they're not used to getting beaten. Whereas the kids had to fight for it. When you get to 17, 18, they're usually the ones that, you know, there's a lot of fight in the dog. And they're the ones that win your medals into under 23 and beyond, because they've just got that inner drive. So I wanted to make sure that we picked up both the little ones that got a bit of fight, and then the big ones that have got the natural ability as well.
So what's the second strand of school rowing?
So the second strand is based on a model I started at Moscow Community Academy in Hackney, which has now been running since 2010. This is, in many instances, in most respects, replicating the model where we can that exists in independent schools in this country. So it's a full-time professional coach in a state school. The school either employs the person, or there's a combination of contributions to the funding of that role. We rent boats from Leeds Rowing Club, so that's just to, you know, to get us going for the first 2 or 3 years while we try and find funding to build our own fleet. But we rent boats from the local club. We have the full-time member of staff. The school has invested in quite a few rowing machines. And the model there is, as they enter secondary school, in the first 2 years, there's indoor rowing on the PE curriculum. So that way, every kid gets a baseline of technical ability. At the end of their second year in secondary school, we then do a combination of selection and self-selection. Again, you know, rewarding the ones who are persistent and keen, and rewarding and seeking out the ones that have got ability. And we create a squad at the end of year 8, so second year of secondary school. And those kids will start to, halfway through the year, get onto the water and do 1 or 2 sessions a week, and a bit of strength and conditioning at school, and that sort of just basic stuff. And then each year that progresses, when they get to year 9, which is the first year, it's hard to explain for American listeners here, but in independent schools will start in year 9, because they have a prep school up until then, whereas state schools, they start 2 years earlier. But our kids in our state schools are usually a head shorter, there's not level nutrition, they don't have the level of school sport at a younger age. So we're playing catch up for 2 years. Year 9, we start to compete externally for the first time, you know, so we'll go to that schools and that sort of thing. So I mean, we had one of these kids, we were interviewed, and we said, you know, what do you like most about rowing? So, wow, it's just so much better than football. You know, if it's football, I just, you know, play on the same bit of grass. And, you know, to give you an idea, you know, there's a town which is, you know, about an hour's drive away. And he said, yeah, we're rowing. We got to go to York. Like, it was the other end of the earth. And, you know, it's just a journey. You know, it's not far away at all. But for him, it was this opportunity to go and row somewhere else. So for them, they get to row externally. They get to go down to the Olympic rowing lake, Dorney, that sort of thing. And then we progress them on, and then they move into the sixth form. And it's only when they get to the sixth form, which is the last 2 years of school, where we start to up the level and the intensity of training. So very similar to the public school model, much more focused. We meet all the costs in terms of race fees, in terms of transport, in terms of accommodation. All the costs are met, because there's no way those parents are going to meet any of those costs. So the school starts to, in this respect, very much act in loco parentis, sort of just makes sure that the hands are held and there are no barriers to participation. The first model works in schools that are sort of kids from not an affluent background, but a background where they can afford their own race fees, where we really target perversely enough, the independent school model in the areas of greatest disadvantage. So we can, as I say, act in loco parentis and take away those barriers. And obviously
kids love it.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's not all kids love it, but it's I always say to teachers, when you're looking for kids who might like this, you're looking for the 12th man on the football team. 11 people being on the football team normally, soccer team, sorry. So you're looking for that kid who likes sport, who is not as good at sport as they want to be, but has got that hunger. So when they come, they're a bit more dedicated. They'll do what's necessary. And because they don't have this natural talent in ball games or something like that, you could explain to them there's, in rowing, like in cycling or swimming, there's an absolute, not just correlation, but causation between work done and outcome achieved. The more you train, the harder you train, the more you elevate your heart rate each week. In the end, the faster you'll go. So those kids who are willing to do the work, they're usually fairly studious kids, or they're certainly quiet and diligent, if nothing else. So you're always trying to educate teachers that you've got to look for that slightly different kid who probably isn't the first most obvious athlete. And if you can treat the kids like adults, if you can speak to them like adults and say, give me 2 or 3 years, because it's going to take time, and just make it fun, make it enjoyable, they usually respond really well. So yeah, they love it. It's something different. Okay, it's not so great this time of year when it's 0 degrees outside and they have to get out of bed on a Saturday, Sunday morning. But if you're there with your mates, and they feel a little bit special. We do make the sport, we try and make it, certainly in the other strand where it's quite intense engagement, it really is a way to accrue status in the school. And we make it like, a big deal, and you want to be part of the rowing team. So, in most schools I've worked in, you end up, by the time we get to the end of school, the head boy and the head girl are often rowers, for reasons, a lot of your listeners will be able to relate to.
I'm giving you a microphone. What could achieve society through school programs like this?
Sorry, it just broke up. Could you just repeat that question, please?
I'm giving you a magic wand.
Mm-hmm.
What could sport achieve for society?
I think it could absolutely certainly in the UK, I can't speak for anywhere else, but I think state school sport, not just rowing, but state school sport, properly structured, could absolutely transform the way educational outcomes, and then the social and economic impacts will absolutely be there. The reason I say this, I guess the analogy I draw is that what they do in maths, English, science, or any subject, what you're effectively giving a child there is bricks, mortar, water. Okay, you're giving them the building blocks of how to build their own future. With sport, which is great, but there's materials on the ground. What sport and extracurricular activity does, it gives them a trowel, it teaches them how to lay bricks, and it means they can turn that material into something meaningful. And I think the curriculum is providing the raw materials, and the extracurricular stuff develops the young person, develops the ability to seek out challenge, the personal self-confidence, the ability to, the desire to take risks and no fear of those, teamwork, leadership, all these things, all these sort of social skills. Really, I think if you can really focus on education, extracurricular education, and make it as critical as what happens in the curriculum, then you're creating that well-rounded person who can go into any environment and use those materials effectively. So I guess that was the real opportunity for me in coming to Leeds and working with a big, world-class academic environment with a lot of research going on. So we've created something called iRow, which we call it's the impact of rowing on well-being. And we're doing a clinical study, which is in its pilot year. We've got some funding for this to get it going. We've got the former Dean of Medicine, who is a specialist in adolescent psychiatry, Professor David Cottrell. He's supervising with myself and someone from Food Science and Nutrition. And we're looking at all these young people. We're looking at their postcodes. We're looking at their SAT scores. We're looking at their levels of attendance. And we're doing psychometric evaluation on them as well, something called the MTQ48 test. We're taking all this baseline data and some physical assessments as well. We're starting that in year 9, and we want to measure as accurately as we can the relationship between all those data points. Postcodes, for us, I think in America it's zip codes, written into that because of the census you get every now and then in the UK. You can extrapolate for a person born in that postcode, the likely impact on the Department of Health, the likely impact on the criminal justice system, on welfare, in essence, the cost to the state over the lifetime of that person. Now, if we can show through, good investment, in this case in rowing, but it could be absolutely any sport, and hopefully it's lots of sports, if we can start to prove that it has a positive impact on physical and mental well-being, that then has a positive impact on attendance and academic attainment, which anecdotally we know to be true, but there's absolutely no proof out there. Then we can say this person is more likely to go to higher education. We then track their progression into higher education. And then there's another long-term statistical modeling, long-term statistical modeling we can use to extrapolate that again and say, okay, this person who was on this tangent, going on to cost the exchequer, make it up, £500,000, net cost to the exchequer over their lifetime, but they become part of the tax base, and then the opportunity cost, the cost saving to the exchequer over their lifetime is £750,000. You can say for a £400 or £500 investment in school sport in sort of state schools, 4 or 5 years in secondary school, or even going further back, that investment at that age, if we can prove what the impact is, then you make a very powerful case to take to policymakers, and that is a long-term aspiration of what we do. So absolutely, I love rowing. Let's enjoy rowing. Let's try and do as well as we can. Let's not be scared by pursuing success, pursuing competitive success. Let's not demonize that, but let's look at all the benefits it can have, more broadly in a young person's life. And if we're looking, we want this study to be a sort of 10, 15, 20-year study, a big cohort study, not just in state schools in Leeds, but in schools across the country, in a variety of sports, in a variety of educational settings, be that state schools or independent schools, so we can get a lot of data together and really prove what the long-term financial benefit will be for UK PLC. And then I think, obviously, I don't think you need to be a genius to understand what the social impact will be as well. So that is a long-term aspiration of what we're doing in Leeds. We're at the very beginning.
Well, I commend that wholeheartedly. Can we talk a little bit about the model of what you've built around the building of the rowing club? So you mentioned when you visited it that it was closed, and that's presumably because students row before classes early in the morning and presumably after classes. How are you using that building as part of your bigger plan?
Okay, so we're going for low-hanging fruit first. So to give you a bit of background, when I first approached Leeds University, they asked me to. They were part of a bigger, broader. I'll come back to answering the question, but to get there, they asked me to present to a steering group in Leeds, which was focused on rowing. At the end of that meeting, they said, "Well, quite good if someone just ran this." And I thought, "Okay, well that sounds like an invitation." And I was working for RowIR at the time, and then I just sat down with a few people at the end of the meeting and said, "Well, okay, I'll just go out and meet some head teachers. I'll just go and introduce myself and see who's interested in, starting a Mossball model. So who's the best person to speak to?" And they said, "Well, you should go and speak to Sir John Townsley, who just won his knighthood for turning around, underperforming schools and turning them into outstanding schools." So 2 weeks later, I drove back up the M1 from London, and I was sitting talking to him. He said, "Well, I want all my schools to have a full-time coach in them." And he's got 5 secondary schools and a 6th form college in his trust. They're multi-academy trusts here. And I want to do that in 3 years. Now, okay, it's not going to happen in 3 years, but I admire the ambition, and it's just the sort of thing I want to hear. So we've started with Gorse. And and then Leeds Rowing Club, as I said, we had a hire deal with them to hire their boats off them. They make a little bit of money, but we get the Gorse kids in there between sort of 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock pretty much every day. I think there's only Mondays we don't do at the moment, and then on the weekends as well. So we row in the afternoons when the students have finished and the adults have finished coaching and teaching in the morning, rowing in the morning. So with those dead times, like I said, when it was shut up shop, those dead times in the middle of the day where the boat's not being utilised, the boats are sitting there dry on the racks, that's when we are able to get in there with the kids, and they bring them down in the minibuses. But it's no different to what we did in London, and it just really sort of segs quite nicely because we'll be off the water by 5, and then everybody starts to arrive from work and is on the water for about 6. So we don't really interfere with them, and it's maximising the facility.
And your plans for the wider community of people who are not part of a university or a school, i.e. adults, do they fit into this?
One day. For me, it's really, as you would have heard, there's a big emphasis on using sport to transform young lives. So that is absolutely our main focus. I think, and I've been more than guilty of this in the past, it's really easy to spread yourself thin and not be focused on 1 or 2 key things, and then you're a mile wide, inch deep, and you're not really penetrating and having the impact you want to have. So there may be a time in the future where we really focus on providing rowing opportunities for adults, but at the moment the role adults play is as coaches and volunteers to give back into the program and volunteer and support the development of young people. So yes, we will develop indoor programs eventually, but I think it's a real focus on, those in most need and where you can have the biggest upside and the greatest impact at the moment.
And you're starting a charity, you told me.
Yeah. So we're just a limited company at the moment. RowUK was really just a way of me creating an organisation where I could act as a consultant into various organisations, so I could invoice them. But very quickly we sort of started to build our social media. We built a website, and it's become more of a brand. It's become something bigger, but it's still a limited company, which is great until you want to try and raise funds to support those institutions you work with that can't necessarily fund their element of the program themselves. State schools, gosh, I think their capital budget on PE equipment buys them about 2.5 rowing machines a year. So when you think they've got to repair the hall and they've got to, buy trampolines or whatever the case may be, it's a big decision for them. So at that point, very quickly for most state schools, it's like, well, I can't afford it. So that was acting as a barrier to us expanding our programs. So I thought, well, the only way I can do this is to start a foundation, which we call the RowUK Foundation. It's going through the Charity Commission application process at the moment. We expect to hear some positive news, hopefully, in the next few weeks. And then that allows me really to try and fill in those gaps, those funding gaps, to achieve funding so I can start to employ more people. And that is just the quickest way to get money into the organisation to be able to meet all those needs. So yeah, the charity is a big part of what we're doing, a big part of growth over the next 2-3 years. And we're fortunate enough, actually, we're a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Rowing, which is a group of MPs and Lords and interested people in the UK that meet once a month and just discuss rowing in Parliament, and then speak to politicians to see what they can do to support. And they've been very kind, and they've offered us the opportunity to run a fundraiser when we get our charity number in Parliament, which I imagine will be the end of this year. And that will be an opportunity for people to chuck some money into the RowUK Foundation pot and allow us to really push on. Certainly into this year, beginning of next. But yeah, really exciting. Again, I didn't think I'd start a charity. I didn't think I'd start a business, but you have to put these vehicles together if you want to achieve what you want to achieve.
Now, one of the biggest handicaps in the UK that rowing suffers from is perception, negative perception that it's for posh people and it's very expensive. You presumably have come up against this. Have you got any specific strategies for local clubs who might want to copy your approach? How do they overcome this? There's no question that perception is there. I think it's a little unfair, first of all, but having said that, I can entirely understand why that perception would come about. I mean, what are your sort of biggest
your bigger people who don't understand rowing, what do they see the most? Well, they see the Oxford-Cambridge boat race, which is obviously, it has a reputation for being elitist. It is the elite level of sport. But yeah, I mean, most people on there are probably sort of, people coming from America or Canada or Australia. Otherwise, though, it's people with a plumbing accent. So there's certainly that perception, and most of the school rowing in this country is public schools. So people from well-heeled backgrounds. However, I would say even more than 50% of the rowing in this country is just normal community clubs. So it's not entirely accurate, but as you say, the perception is such. So how do we overcome this? Yes, you can do. I think it's important to try and make rowing look accessible and a little bit sexy and not so sort of fusty, and not too many signet rings and not too many coral trousers and not too many blazers. So, when we, from RowUK brand, we try and avoid that. We try and make it a little bit more, just a little bit more straightforward. I don't really think you have to. I think if you go into a state school and you're talking straight to the head teacher and you're saying, here's a real opportunity to turn that perception on its head. You as a school leader have got an opportunity to turn that on its head and, get your young people exposed to, environments they wouldn't normally get the chance to be exposed to. Sir John Townsley, for example, the CEO of the Gorse Academy Trust, he said to me, the great thing about rowing for my kids, he said, is like going to a Buckingham Palace garden party. You get exposed to this world that you never would have been exposed to before. And all of a sudden it sets off things in your mind and you start to get this understanding. And we're not saying we want to turn our kids into little Lord Fauntleroys, far from it. But it is that opportunity, to be exposed to another world, to see that there's, other things to do, to mix with kids, for whom going to higher education is a real natural thing. I think I've found that you knock on the door of head teachers, they all want that sort of thing for their kids. So it's just wearing out your shoe leather. It's just getting in front of these people. It's saying that, I came from a very normal background. It's been great for me. It's really just creating an environment where your young people can flourish, raise their aspirations and develop the skills to go into a different world. And very rarely get turned down. Most people get that and they want that, and it's an opportunity, to give that opportunity for their kids. It's not. I don't find it very difficult. It's just, you just got to mean it.
I certainly found when I was at Marlow Rowing Club in the UK that we found the local newspaper was extremely supportive. And if we sent them little bits of news that, little Benjamin had participated in his first regatta and come last or whatever it was, but he didn't fall in, and a photo, and that actually they were called the Bucks Free Press, and they were lovely, and they would pretty much publish almost anything we sent them. So anyone who picked up the free local newspaper or saw it in a cafe or a coffee shop in town might see a photo of the rowing club and somebody that they might know. And we felt that was a good way to work on the local community, not necessarily through the schools. Yeah, I mean, you might get the odd cynic, but I mean, I honestly don't. I very rarely come up against that. Most people just want to support a little Cinderella story or just provide opportunities or whatever. Most people just really want to get behind opportunities for kids, and people can tell when you're genuine, So I don't really find it's too much of a problem, to be honest. In fact, it's another nice challenge, and it actually gets you in the door because it's a little bit different. It makes people sit up and listen, Now you're also working with British Rowing on something completely new. Tell us about that. Yeah, this is something that British Rowing approached Steve O'Connor at Fulham Reach Boat Club. I believe you've spoken to Steve a few times. Steve was actually my stroke man at university. And so they approached Steve and asked him to speak to other organisations similar to Fulham Reach Boat Club, being London Youth Rowing, RowUK, Warrington Youth Row. We're all trying to do the same thing with slightly varying models, but we're all essentially trying to do the same thing. So British Rowing are starting a foundation themselves, and of course they're incredibly well connected, so I imagine they'll really get up with a bang. But British Rowing, certainly under Andy Parkinson, have been undergone a very interesting transformation in my view. And they've done this great thing. They said, well, we think we're going to raise some money. We really want to put that funding into building rowing in state schools. We're not entirely sure we know how to do it, but we're pretty sure that you guys do.
So as opposed to them, normal complaint we all have, about government or whatever, doing this top-down approach that here's what we want to achieve and here's how we think you should do it. They've come to those people who are actually doing delivery on the front line and said, well, you tell us what it is that is going to bring a successful, what is a successful way of getting state schools engaged and actually having a successful program. So we all met for the first time about 3 weeks ago now and started firing around ideas for the first time. British Rowing were obviously in that meeting. So, I think, I don't think there's any value in being, sort of flat-footed or even cynical about these things. A national governing body is making all the right noises, is asking your opinion. It's a great opportunity for us all to work in partnership with them and really, hopefully, drive state school rowing forward. So I'm really excited about it. It's nice to be involved and nice to be asked.
My previous RowingChat guest was from the US, from Saratoga Rowing Association, which is a medium-sized town in upstate New York. And we talked also about their local funding model. Like you, they're very school-orientated. And they were very interesting. And Chris Clark, who's the head coach there, said, we have 2 channels of fundraising. One hires coaches and the other pays for equipment. He said, the kids do the fundraising for the equipment. They want a new boat, they want new oars. We do a sponsored row or equivalent a year, and I think they do a silent auction as well. But he said our regattas, and they have several which bring in a lot of different athletes, not just schools, but I think they also have masters regattas and a head race. The regattas are only about paying for our coaching team, because they realize that although the volunteer model is good, it has its limitations, particularly if it's a parent, because when their child moves on, then they are obviously reluctant to continue volunteering. And I was very interested by this defined split between raising money to pay for boats and raising money to pay for expert coaches. Do you have the same perception?
Yeah, I mean, everything we do in terms of funding, all the funding pots we seek, you're looking at either capital or revenue, or capital or operational, whichever however you want to state it. Because there are more on costs beyond just coaching. Certainly for us, if kids want to go racing, it's £10-15 a race, and it's just utterly prohibitively expensive. So there are other on costs as well, which we need to take into account. But yeah, it's split in 2 ways. I mean, yeah, that sort of thing seems really very interesting to me. In fact, I've just sort of sent a memo around to all the schools we're working with to get together a sort of parent-teacher fundraising group. So that's probably one of the next things we'll be working on. In some respects, the schools can sort of fundraise within the school. They can certainly fundraise for equipment going forward. So that's something we'll be looking to do. But then obviously we can put a fundraising committee for them to do it through RowUK once we've got the charity number. So yeah, that's definitely something we look at. But yeah, absolutely a split down the middle. Where possible, I like to get institutions to see if they can support the revenue costs. And then it's about probably, if anything, probably centralising those capital costs if we can, in the same way that Leeds Rowing Club have got all the boats. There's that central, that central equipment, and then you want lots of schools coming in and utilising that equipment. That would be one way to take away that huge, upfront cost that you would need for a boathouse and boats. But yeah, certainly that. If we can centralise capital and decentralise revenue costs, I think that feels like, a city-based model, the way to do it.
Ben, it's been absolutely delightful. Thank you for your generosity, sharing your ideas, your insights, obviously the hurdles that you've faced and are beginning to overcome. And I sincerely hope that people will hear and be interested and want to know more. Please tell the listeners how they can get hold of you.
Okay, probably the best thing is they can inquire on our website. All the details are on there, which is rowuk.co.uk. Or you can just email me direct. Absolutely happy to take an email direct. So it's bcox, that's BCOX, no dot, BCOX at rowuk.co.uk. I'd love to hear from anyone, ideas, anyone who wants to get involved, come and see us. Absolutely. We're very, very keen to speak to anyone.
It's been a delight. Thank you for your time. And to all our listeners, please remember to subscribe on the website, rowing.chat, so that you can get notified of new episodes as they happen. You can help us by telling your friends about RowingChat and telling us what you think. Give us your feedback too. We want to improve. Till next time. Bye-bye.
See you.